The stopwatch on the digital screen is ticking relentlessly. 79 minutes and 42 seconds. The numbers bleed in a harsh, neon red through the heavy, suffocating blanket of fog. On the sidelines of the dilapidated district football pitch, Ethan's fingers are trembling. He is 26, wearing a crisp, branded tracksuit, and his hands smash against the screen of his high-tech tactical tablet. The screen is flashing error codes. The advanced GPS tracking vests on his young players are losing signal. The drone he launched to analyze structural formations is blind, hovering uselessly somewhere in the gray sky above. Damn it, move your built-in positions. Ethan roars, his voice tearing through the damp air, raw with panic, but on the pitch, his words are swallowed by the mist. His players, a group of 11 and 12-year-old boys, from the poorest families in the suburb, are wandering like ghosts. They are exhausted. Their cheap, mismatched jerseys are soaked through with icy sweat and freezing rain. The scoreboard behind the goal post looms like a monolith of failure. Home teams, said us. Suddenly, a heavy, metallic clanking sound begins to rhythmically echo from the edge of the technical area. Clink, clank, clink, clank. Through the thick haze, a rusted three-wheeled iron cart slowly emerges. Pushing it is an old man. He is nearly 60, wearing a faded, patched-up military raincoat that smells of wet earth and cheap tobacco. His left leg drags slightly with a heavy limp, scraping against the gravel. His hands, thick, calloused, and permanently stained with grass juice and white lime, are gripping the handles of the cart. He is carefully dropping white powder onto the muddy grass, attempting to reline the penalty box that has been washed away by the storm. Ethan's eyes snap to the old man. The frustration, the humiliation of the looming defeat, and the sheer helplessness inside him boil over into unbridled rage. Hey, old man, get that garbage out of here, Ethan screams, stepping directly into the old man's path, his expensive European leather boots splashing mud onto the old man's boots. Are you blind? Can't you see we are in the middle of a decisive match? Your cheap lime powder is blinding my players. Get out. The old man stops. He slowly straightens his bent back, his spine popping audibly under the raincoat. He doesn't look angry. He doesn't look offended. His eyes, slightly clouded by age and decades of staring into the harsh winter wind, look calmly at the young coach. He wipes a drop of freezing rain from his brow with the back of his rough hand. The lines must be visible, young man, the old man speaks. His voice is low, raspy, carrying the weight of a man who hasn't spoken more than 10 words a day for years. Without the lines, the boys won't know where the boundaries are. When the fog rolls in from the mountain, a person can easily lose their footing if they don't know where the edge is. I don't need your primitive wisdom, Ethan snaps, waving his tablet in the old man's face. I have a wefabelism. I have data analytics. I have a heat map of every square meter of this field. Your lines mean nothing if my players can't execute a basic European passing sequence, because this pitch is a swamp. Just take your cart and hide in your shack. The old man looks down at the tablet screen, which is currently flickering and dying due to the moisture in the air. A faint, almost imperceptible shadow of a sad smile touches his chapped lips. He doesn't say another word. He simply bows his head slightly, grips the handles of his rusted cart, and drags his bad leg back into the dense, white fog, disappearing as silently as he arrived. Ethan turns back to the pitch, but his heart is sinking. He knows what this match means. It isn't just a game. This is the final of the regional youth tournament. Sitting in the covered VIP stands across the field is Mr. Vance, a ruthless real estate tycoon who holds the title deed to this piece of land. Mr. Vance had made it completely clear. If the suburb youth team loses today, the local football program will be permanently defunded. The pitch will be bulldozed by Monday morning to make way for a concrete industrial warehouse. And for these boys like Leo, the scrawny 12-year-old striker whose mother works 3 shifts at the textile factory, this football pitch is the only sanctuary they have. It is the only place keeping them away from the dangerous street gangs of the railway slums. Ethan looks at Leo. The boy is standing near the center circle, his breath coming out in thick white plumes. His right shoe, a heavily worn, second-hand pair of boots, has a severe tear near the toe, held together only by a fragile piece of tape. Leo looks back at Ethan, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope, waiting for a tactical instruction that can save them. But Ethan has nothing left to give. His modern textbook tactics require a perfect, dry pitch and high-speed synchronization. Against the opponent, a heavily sponsored academy team from the city, filled with towering, well-fed players who are intentionally using aggressive, physical fouls under the cover of the fog, Ethan's team is being systematically broken. A whistle blows harshly. Another foul. One of Ethan's midfielders is pushed into the mud, crying out in pain. The referee barely sees it through the mist. The city team mocks them, laughing as they jog back into position. Ethan grips his hair in desperation. He looks at his watch. 82 minutes. The concrete mixers are already waiting at the gate of the stadium, literal and metaphorical shadows waiting to bury the dreams of these children. And Ethan, with all his certificates and pride, is completely blind in the fog. 4 weeks before the catastrophic night in the mist, the suburban sun was relentlessly baking the cracked clay beneath the grass. Ethan had arrived at the district pitch in a shiny, white SUV, a lease paid for by his own savings to project an image of absolute professionalism. He stepped onto the dry turf, carrying a carbon fiber tactical board, 3 tripods, and a brand new DJI-inspired drone. To him, this job was a stepping stone, a temporary sacrifice in the wasteland of the suburbs before a major club in the capital noticed his flawless tactical methodologies. The first thing Ethan saw was not the children, but the old man. The old man was on his knees, his bad leg stretched out awkwardly on the dirt track, his face inches away from a patch of uneven grass. He held a battered, yellow wooden ruler, measuring the height of the blades with tedious, agonizing slowness. Beside him was an old tin bucket filled with gray river sand. With 2 calloused fingers, the old man was carefully pinching small handfuls of sand and dropping them into microscopic sinkholes hidden deep beneath the turf. Ethan stopped, his clean shadow falling over the old man's weathered neck. "You are wasting time," Ethan said, his voice carrying the clipped, sharp tone of a city intellectual. The Gatsa height should be exactly 24 millimeters for optimal ball circulation. Son, I have already submitted the municipal request for an automated lawnmower. You don't need to do this manually. The old man did not look up immediately. He placed one last pinch of sand into a small depression, smoothed it out with his palm, and then slowly, painfully rose to his feet. His knees made a dry, cracking sound. "The automated machines don't feel the ground, young man," the old man murmured, his eyes looking past Ethan toward the horizon. "The earth changes every week. The water from the mountains seeped under the left flank last winter. The roots are loose there. If you cut it too short, the soil will collapse under a heavy boy's weight." Ethan let out a short, scoffing laugh, adjusting the collar of his premium tracksuit. "Soil dynamics are accounted for in my digital topography scan. I don't run a farm here, old man. I run a modern football project. Your primitive methods are making the facility look like an abandoned backyard. Please, stay out of the technical areas while I am conducting drills. That afternoon, Ethan gathered the 12 boys. He laid out his expensive cones, set up his tripod cameras to record their body posture, and launched the drone. The boys stared at the flying machine with wide, terrified eyes, their worn-out canvas shoes shifting uncomfortably on the hard ground. Among them was Leo. Leo was smaller than the others, his ribs showing faintly beneath his oversized, faded jersey. He stood at the back of the line, trying desperately to hide his right foot behind his left. The sole of his right boot was completely detached, flapping like an open mouth every time he took a step. "All right, listen up," Ethan shouted, clapping his hands sharply. "We play positional football, high pressing, triangular passing sequences, one-touch transitions. If you cannot process the tactical data on this board, you sit on the bench. I don't care who your parents are, or how long you've lived in this neighborhood. Excellence is non-negotiable." The training session was a disaster. The boys, raised on concrete alleyways and uneven dirt lots, could not grasp the complex European geometry. Ethan was drawing on his board. They stumbled. They misplaced basic 5-yard passes. The hard, uneven surface of the pitch made the cheap, heavy balls bounce unpredictably, defying every mathematical trajectory on Ethan's tablet. Every time a ball flew off target, it rolled toward the old man's rusted iron cart at the edge of the field. The old man would slowly pick it up, wipe the dust off with his stained apron, and place it gently back on the line. Ethan watched this with growing irritation. To him, the limping, old man was the very symbol of why this community was trapped in poverty. A stubborn adherence to obsolete traditions, a total lack of modern ambition. By the end of the second week, Ethan had had enough. He marched straight into the small, tin-roofed administrative office of the district sports committee. He slammed his tactical report onto the desk of the elderly clerk. "I want the groundskeeper removed," Ethan demanded, his face flushed with frustration. "He is a distraction. He refuses to follow my instructions on turf maintenance. He uses illegal lime powder that ruins my drone's lens visibility, and he spends hours talking to the bench players, infecting them with a defeatist mindset. If you want this team to win the sponsor tournament, give me a professional crew." The clerk looked at the paper, then sighed, looking through the window at the old man who was currently cleaning a rusted shovel under the fading sunlight. "He has been here for 30 years. Coach Ethan, he doesn't ask for a salary, only the right to live in the tool shack. And that's exactly why the system is broken," Ethan snapped. "Charity doesn't win trophies. If he stays, the elite academy teams will laugh us out of the stadium before the match even begins. It's him or my data project." The next, a white piece of paper was pinned to the door of the rusted tool shack. An official notice of termination. The old man stood before the door for a long time, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his faded military coat. He did not shout. He did not appeal to the sports committee. He simply turned around, took his rusted key, and handed it to Ethan, who was waiting by the center circle with his stopwatch. "The key to the irrigation valve is stiff," the old man said softly, his voice showing no anger, only a strange, quiet solemnity. "You have to turn it twice to the left, then hold it until the air clears. If you force it, the pipe will burst under the pressure." "I know how to operate a valve, old man," Ethan replied coldly, snatching the key without making eye contact. "Your time is up. You have until the end of the tournament to clear your personal belongings from the property." The old man nodded slowly. He did not pack his bags. He simply walked back to his small bench under the willow tree, picked up his wooden ruler, and watched the children train from a distance, a silent ghost exiled from the very dirt he had protected for 3 decades. The metal roof of the tool shack rattled violently as a fresh gust of wind swept down from the jagged peaks of the northern ridge. Inside, the air was dense with the sharp tang of rusted iron, damp earth, and ancient liniment oil. A single, naked light bulb swung from a frayed black cord, casting erratic, dancing shadows across the cramped space. Leo sat on an overturned wooden crate, his small shoulders hunched forward as he stared blankly at his right foot. The torn sole of his canvas boot hung open like a dead weight, the remaining adhesive crusty and white. His breath formed faint, desperate plumes of frost in the unheated shack. Across from him, the old man knelt on the cold concrete floor, his bad leg extended stiffly behind him. He didn't speak. He picked up a heavy wooden needle, threaded with a thick, coarse strand of hemp twine taken from an old potato sack. With agonizing precision, the old man pushed the needle through the tough, split rubber of the shoe. His knuckles, swollen and white with arthritis, strained with every stitch. Tool, tooth, pull, the rhythmic sound was the only thing defying the howling wind outside. Coach Ethan says I don't have the spatial intelligence for the European system, Leo whispered, his voice cracking as he wiped his nose with a muddy sleeve. He told the committee I'm a tactical liability because I can't maintain the triangular distance during transitions. He's going to bench me for the entire tournament, isn't he? The old man didn't look up from his work. He tightened the nut, pulling the hemp thread, until the torn rubber lip of the shoe was pulled, flush against the canvas upper. The ground here doesn't understand triangles, Leo, the old man murmured, his voice low and scraping like gravel. The city teams train on synthetic turf. It's flat, it's perfect. It obeys their computers. But this field is old riverbed. It has a spine. It has pockets where the water hides. He placed the repaired shoe on the floor and picked up his old, yellowed wooden ruler, the one with the strange, hand-carved notches near the 12-inch mark. He tapped the tip of the ruler against Leo's left ankle. When the grass is wet, the clay beneath the left penalty arc softens by 3 inches. If you try to plant your foot hard to make a quick, sharp turn, like the coach demands, your ankle will roll. The machine doesn't see that. Your eyes shouldn't look at the ball, boy. They should look at the veil of the white line. Before Leo could answer, the wooden door of the shack was kicked open with a loud, metallic bang. Ethan stood in the frame, his face flushed red from the freezing wind, his premium high-visibility jacket glowing under the swinging light bulb. He looked at the old man, holding the ruler, then down at Leo's patched shoe, his eyes narrowing with deep disgust. "What did I tell you, Leo?" Ethan barked, stepping into the shack without wiping his mud-clotted boots. "You're supposed to be doing your sensory activation drills on the gravel lot. Instead, I find you lurking in this dump, listening to old superstitions from someone who doesn't even have a registered email address." The old man slowly stood up, using the edge of the workbench to support his weight. He placed the wooden ruler into his deep coat pocket, his expression completely unreadable. "I was just tightening his sole, Coach," the old man said softly. "I didn't ask you," Ethan snapped, turning his back completely on the old man to face the boy. "Get your gear and get out to the bus, Leo now. If I see you near this shack again, you are off the roster entirely. We don't have room for liabilities." Leo grabbed his shoe, his head bowed low, and bolted out of the door into the freezing downpour. Left alone with the old man, Ethan let out a short, cold breath that turned into mist. He looked around the shack, his gaze lingering on the old, grease-stained workbenches and the jars of mismatched screws. "The committee signed your official exit papers this morning," Ethan said, pulling out his smartphone to check his live weather radar feed. "You have 48 hours to clear this junk out. The sponsors are bringing in a commercial turf management company from the city on Monday. They use GPS-guided mowers. They don't need a man with a wooden stick." The old man looked at Ethan's glowing phone screen. The radar was a swirling mass of deep green and yellow, indicating a massive moisture front moving in from the valley. "The electronic radar is missing the low-altitude thermal inversion behind the ridge, young man," the old man said, his tone devoid of malice, carrying only the weight of absolute certainty. "In 2 hours, the cold air will hit the wet grass. The moisture won't rise. It will trap the mountain smoke right on the surface. You won't see your own hand in front of your face." Ethan chuckled, sliding the phone back into his pocket, with a practiced flick of his wrist. "I have 3 different weather applications syncing with the National Meteorological Database, old man. It's a light drizzle. My system accounts for a standard visibility drop. Enjoy your final night on the property. Don't touch the lines on your way out." Ethan turned and marched out, the heavy wooden door swinging shut behind him, leaving the old man standing alone under the flickering bulb as the first tendrils of thick, gray mountain fog began to seep through the cracks in the tin wall. The raw mechanical rumble of the rusted old roller engine died down, leaving only the sound of heavy raindrops drumming against the plastic tarp covering the back of the 3-wheeled cart. It was 11:45 p.m. The district stadium was dead silent, locked in the throat of the mountain valley, where the cold air had completely stagnant. The grass felt stiff, almost icy underfoot, bloated with 36 hours of continuous downpour. Ethan stood inside the illuminated press box at the top of the main stand, his eyes bloodshot as he stared down at his tactical layout sheet. Every heat map he generated, based on the previous week's matches, suggested that the City Academy team would dominate the central corridor using their physical superiority. But when he looked through the double-glazed glass window, his chest tightened. The low-altitude inversion the old man had warned him about had arrived exactly as predicted. A low, milky fog was rolling over the concrete walls, flattening itself against the turf like a thick, gray carpet. Visibility was already down to less than 20 yards. Suddenly, a small flare of yellow light caught Ethan's eye near the corner flag on the far left. He picked up his modern digital binoculars, adjusting the focal lens to cut through the haze. Through the circle of magnification, Ethan saw the old man. The groundskeeper was not wearing his military raincoat. He was in a stained wool sweater, his bad leg dragging heavily through the thick mud. In his hands, he carried a rusted metal coal shovel and a heavy burlap sack. He stopped precisely at the edge of the 18-yard box, an area Ethan's data profile marked as low utility. The old man dropped to his knees, ignoring the freezing water soaking through his trousers. He dug his rough, calloused fingers into the turf, pulling back a flap of grass to reveal a dark, hollow sinkhole where the underground mountain stream had eroded the limestone subsoil. Ethan watched, paralyzed by an unfamiliar curiosity, as the old man began to carefully shovel coarse river sand into the hidden cavity, leveling it with absolute precision, until the surface was flush with the surrounding ground. He smoothed the grass back over like a father, tucking a child into bed, then took a handful of white lime from his pouch and threw it down, marking a thick, uneven streak that was 3 times wider than regulation. The old man repeated this process 5 times along the left wing, his breath escaping his lungs in jagged, painful gasps that Ethan could almost hear through the distance. When the old man finished the last patch, he stood up, his body trembling from the wet cold. He pulled Leo's repaired canvas boot out of his deep pocket and tucked a small, folded piece of grease-proof paper inside the toe box before placing the boot neatly on the bottom shelf of the player dugout. Ethan lowered his binoculars. His hands were cold. His phone buzzed on the table behind him. A notification from the regional committee, reminding him that the commercial surveyors would arrive at 8 a.m. on Monday to stake out the coordinates for the Industrial Warehouse Foundation. The pressure felt like a physical weight pressing against his throat. He looked back out into the dark, empty field, but the old man had already dissolved into the heavy gray mist, leaving only those thick, irregular, white lines glowing like primitive warnings in the dark. The next afternoon, the atmosphere inside the stadium was suffocating. The City Academy team arrived in a luxury coach, their players tall, uniform, and wearing custom-molded cleats designed for maximum traction. Their head coach, a middle-aged man with a professional license, lanyard hanging over his pristine leather coat, looked at the mud-slicked pitch with a condescending sneer. "We play the match," the city coach said to the match commissioner, his voice loud enough for Ethan to hear. "But this place is an injury hazard. If my players ruin their knees on this swamp, I'll hold the district committee legally liable. Look at those lines. They look like they were drawn by a drunkard." Ethan stood by his bench, his throat dry. He had spent the last 2 hours trying to recalibrate his drone sensory array, but the humidity had fouled the altimeter. His team was huddled inside the concrete locker room, their faces pale, listening to the muffled roar of the crowd through the vents. Leo sat in the corner, his fingers nervously tracing the thick hemp stitches on his right boot. He had found the piece of paper the old man had left inside, but he hadn't opened it yet, keeping it hidden in his palm like a secret amulet. "Listen to me," Ethan shouted as he entered the locker room, his voice tense, missing its usual scientific authority. "The system remains unchanged. Short passes, stay compact. Do not let their central midfielders turn with the ball. We play the triangles. Do you understand?" The boys nodded silently, but their eyes were vacant. They knew the stakes. They knew this was the last time they would ever wear these jerseys. As the team walked out onto the pitch, the mountain fog descended with terrifying speed. By the time the referee blew the opening whistle, the stands had completely vanished. The parents and local residents were nothing more than disembodied voices, shouting from the gray void. The match began, and within 4 minutes, Ethan realized his entire European tactical framework had become obsolete. The ball did not slide. It died in the puddles. Every short, calculated pass Ethan had drilled into the boys stopped dead after 3 yards, allowing the heavy, aggressive city defenders to lung in and steal possession. Ethan's players were sleeping, their cheap sneakers losing purchase on the slick clay, while the city team used their long stride physical power to bypass the midfield entirely with long, direct balls. In the 12th minute, the city team struck a long ball over the top, a slip from Ethan's central defender in the mud, and a brutal finish into the top corner. Home team 0 visitors, 1. Ethan screamed from the touchline, his hands clawing at his tactical board, but his markers were running out of ink from the moisture. "Wide, keep the shape. Use the channels," he bellowed. But the channels were a graveyard of gray water. In the 38th minute, another collision. Ethan's star midfielder went down, his knee buckling as he tried to plant his foot on the slick surface. He screamed in agony, clutching his joint. The medical trainer shook his head immediately. Ethan looked down at his bench in absolute despair. The only substitute left was Leo. The boy looked up, his small face tight under the freezing mist, his hand tightly gripping the small piece of greaseproof paper in his pocket. The icy mountain air seemed to solidify inside Ethan's lungs. The referee's whistle blew twice, signaling a medical stoppage as the injured midfielder was carried off the field, his face white with pain. The scoreboard blurred through the moisture, an unyielding monument of failure. Home team 0 Vitors, 2. Leo, get your vest off. You're going in on the left flank. Ethan barked, his voice straining against the cold downpour. His hands, numb from the freezing rain, struggled to slide the tactical board back into his waterproof pouch. He didn't look at the boy's eyes. He couldn't bear to see the terror, reflecting his own desperation. Leo stood up instantly, his teeth chattering so hard they made a clicking sound. He pulled off his neon green bib, exposing his soaked, oversized jersey. As he reached down to adjust the thick hemp twine, holding his right sole together, his fingers brushed against the small, folded piece of greaseproof paper hidden in his palm. He slipped it into his waistband, stepped over the white chalk boundary line, and ran onto the field. Look at that. They're putting on a scrawny midget with stitched shoes. The city team's captain laughed, his heavy custom-molded aluminum cleats tearing a deep chunk of clay from the turf as he jogged past Leo. Hey kid, try not to break in half when we touch you. Ethan watched from the technical area, his eyes darting back to his tablet screen. The battery icon was flashing red, the tactical map frozen. The sophisticated European positional triangles he had spent months drilling into these children were completely gone, swallowed by the mud. His modern data framework had left him completely blind in the face of a chaotic, physical storm. The referee blew the whistle to resume play. The City Academy team immediately launched a heavy, long-range ball directly toward Leo's side of the pitch. Their massive right winger, a boy 2 heads taller than Leo, sprinted forward like a freight train, his eyes locked on the bouncing ball. Intercept, Leo. Press him. Force him inside. Ethan screamed, stepping right up to the edge of the white line. Leo ran forward, but instead of tracking the player, his eyes dropped to the turf. He noticed the line beneath his feet, the thick, uneven streak of white lime that the old man had thrown down the night before. It wasn't a straight line. It veered slightly outward, tracking 3 inches wide of the standard regulation boundary. When the fog rolls in, look at the veil of the white lime. The old man's raspy voice echoed in Leo's mind. Instead of lunging for the ball, Leo suddenly stopped his momentum, planting his heels short of the wide vet of lime. The towering city winger, focused entirely on Leo's small frame, attempted to make a sharp, aggressive cut inward right on top of the lime line. The moment his expensive, rigid cleat hit that specific square meter of turf, the grass collapsed. The hidden sinkhole, which the old man had reinforced only with loose river sand beneath the surface, gave way under the winger's heavy weight. The player's foot sank 3 inches into the soft, sand-filled trap, his body losing balance instantly as the heavy ball skidded harmlessly away into a puddle. What the? The city winger yelled, tumbling face first into the cold mud, his immaculate white jersey instantly ruined. Leo didn't waste a microsecond. He skipped over the collapsing patch of turf, his stitched canvas boot gripping the harder clay, right where the old man had marked the safety boundary. He gathered the dead ball from the puddle, his small legs churning as he drove forward down the left flank into the open space. The stadium went dead silent, the crowd unable to see the play through the white wall of fog waiting for the disembodied sound of the ball to tell them what was happening. "Go, drive it, Leo," Ethan shouted, his heart leaping into his throat as he ran down the touchline, his eyes wide with a sudden, shocking realization. The boy wasn't running a standard tactical route. He was moving through the mist along a specific, winding path of dry soil, the exact path where the old man had spent the entire night hauling sand. The city's central defender charged out of the fog to cover, his long legs kicking up sprays of muddy water as he lunged with a sliding tackle meant to take Leo out. But Leo didn't try to pass. He remembered the piece of paper. He took a heavy touch outward, dragging the defender toward the second wide line of lime. The defender slid hard, but his body hit the sluggish, unsanded section of the pitch, his momentum dying instantly, in the deep muck like a car stuck in a ditch. Leo spun off the slide, took one look at the hazy shadow of the goalpost through the mist, and struck the ball with the laces of his repaired right shoe. The hemp thread held. The heavy, wet ball flew straight through the gray curtain, dipping under the crossbar before the city goalkeeper could even lift his arms. A sharp, collective gasp echoed from the stands, followed by the frantic waving of the referee's assistant's flag. Goal. Home team, visitors, 2. Ethan stood frozen in the rain, his tablet slipping from his fingers and landing in the mud. He looked down at the wide, irregular white lines stretching across the left wing. They weren't mistakes. They weren't the markings of a senile old man. They were a map. A perfect, physical blueprint of the field's hidden weaknesses and secret strengths, drawn by a man who didn't need a computer to understand the earth beneath his feet. The ball rolled heavily out of the white lace mesh of the goal, splashing into a puddle behind the line. The referee's assistant lowered his flag, blowing a sharp, shrill whistle that echoed mechanically off the invisible concrete stands. The scoreboard flickered through the freezing rain, its red bulb straining to change. Home team, visitors. Ethan stood frozen at the edge of the technical area, his hands gripping the top of his heavy tracksuit trousers. He didn't cheer. He didn't jump. His gaze was locked completely on the wet grass where Leo's torn canvas boot had made contact with the ball. The thick, jagged hemp, twine the old man had used to stitch the soles, was coated in dark gray clay, but it had held the tension perfectly under a full impact strike. Across the field, the City Academy coach slammed his leather-bound binder against the metal bench. "What are you doing out there?" he screamed, his voice muffled by the thick white inversion layer. "He's a scrawny kid with no athletic profile. Stop him from turning. Don't let him use the white channel." The city right-winger was still limping, his expensive, custom-molded aluminum cleat caked with the loose river sand that had collapsed under his feet. He looked down at the pitch with a mixture of confusion and genuine fear. To him, the ground was supposed to be a predictable, synthetic grid. He didn't understand why the left flank was suddenly behaving like a living trap, giving way under his weight, while allowing Leo to pass over it like a ghost. Leo didn't look at the bench. He jogged back to his position, his small chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow gasps. As he passed the center circle, he slipped his hand into his waistbands, his fingers checking the edge of the greaseproof paper. He knew he couldn't open it now. The wind would tear it from his hands, but he didn't need to. The wide, irregular white lines of lime powder were still visible through the gathering gloom, a crude map glowing beneath the surface of the swamp. "Ethan, what's the adjustment?" The local sports committee clerk shouted through the mesh fence behind the dugout, his old voice trembling with cold. "There's only 8 minutes left before regulation time. The real estate crew is already parking the trucks at the main gate." Ethan didn't answer. He looked down at his high-tech tactical tablet. The screen had finally died, the glass completely clouded with internal condensation. And, for the first time in his coaching career, he was completely stripped of his data, his heat maps, and his European spatial geometry. He looked up into the gray wall of fog, realizing that his pride hadn't just blinded him. It had almost buried the only home these children had. The referee blew the whistle to restart play. The city team, furious at the insult of conceding a goal to an unranked neighborhood club, immediately shifted into an aggressive, direct long ball strategy. They used their physical size to crowd the central corridor, their midfielders lunging into tackles with no regard for the slick mud, counting on the referee's limited visibility through the mist. "Leo, don't drop back," Ethan suddenly shouted, his voice losing its cold, analytical tone, replaced by an urgent, raw desperation. "Stay on the white line. Watch the boundary." Leo shifted his stance, his stitched shoe planted right on the edge of the second line mark. The city team's central playmaker received a short pass, looked through the haze, and attempted to drive a low, powerful ball across the grass toward his striker. But the old man hadn't just sanded the holes. He had deliberately left the central dip unsanded, allowing the natural riverbed clay to turn into a thick, suction-like mire. The ball hit the mud patch and stopped dead, losing all its forward momentum in a single second. Leo anticipated it perfectly. He didn't wait for the ball to reach the striker. He sprang forward from the wide line, his light frame, allowing him to glide over the top of the mud while the city defender, trying to adjust, slipped and fell heavily onto his side. "He's through again. Stop him," the city coach roared, sprinting along his touchline. Two defenders closed in on Leo, their arms extended, using their physical leverage to force the small boy toward the corner flag. Leo was running out of room. The thick fog made it impossible to see the goalpost clearly from this angle. But just as his boots reached the corner arc, I saw it, a thick, triple-layered cross of white lime powder, marked right on the grass. It was the final notch on the old man's map. Leo didn't try to look for Ethan. He didn't look for a teammate. He trusted the dirt beneath his feet. Instead of passing short, he dug the toe of his stitched canvas boot deep under the heavy, wet ball, launching a high, looping cross backward, directly against the direction of the freezing mountain wind. The heavy, waterlogged ball spiraled through the dense white wall of fog, slicing directly against the sharp gust of the northern mountain wind. Ethan scrambled down the slick touchline, his eyes locked onto the spot where the ball had vanished into the gray void. He couldn't see the goal. He couldn't see the goalkeeper. The only guide left on the entire pitch was the thick, irregular cross of white lime powder the old man had shoveled down the night before. Suddenly, a loud, heavy crunch echoing from the penalty box broke the freezing silence. The city team's giant central defender had sprinted backward to intercept the trajectory of Leo's cross. But the old man hadn't just modified the sidelines. He knew that the heavy rainfall always pooled directly underneath the penalty spot, creating an invisible, treacherous shelf of loose clay. The defender's rigid, heavy aluminum cleats struck the exact unsanded weak spot. The earth gave way instantly. The defender's balance broke, his massive frame tumbling backward into the muck like a fallen timber, his arms flailing uselessly in the air. Through the shifting curtain of mist, Leo's cross dipped perfectly into the vacated space. Ethan's smallest midfielder, a boy who had spent the entire season being pushed around by the elite academy players, didn't even have to jump. The ball met his forehead cleanly, redirections its weight into the open corner of the net before the blind goalkeeper could even register the strike. The netting snapped with a wet, heavy thud. The referee's whistle blew 3 times, sharp and definitive, pointing straight back to the center circle. The disembodied voices in the stands erupted into a raw, deafening roar that shook the rusted metal roof of the stadium. The crimson bulbs on the manual scoreboard shifted with agonizing mechanical slowness. Home team. Visitors. No, that's impossible. That's a regulation violation. The city coach screamed, his face turning a deep, dangerous purple as he violently shook the mesh fence separating the technical zone from the pitch. The field is structurally compromised. Look at my players. They're sinking into the ground. This match should be forfeited. The match commissioner, a weathered local man wearing a heavy wool cap, walked slowly onto the field, his boots stepping carefully along the hard, sanded line the old man had laid down. He looked down at the mud-covered city defender, then at the wide, irregular lime boundary that still held its shape against the torrential rain. The lines are visible, coach, the commissioner said, his voice quiet but absolute. The groundskeeper marked the natural contours of the district property. Your players chose to run off the safety path. The goal stands. 4 minutes of stoppage time remaining. Ethan stood in the downpour, the cold water streaming down his face, soaking the collar of his expensive city tracksuit. He looked at his hands, then down at his ruined digital tablet lying in the mud. He didn't care about the data anymore. He didn't care about the heat maps or the Capital Club scouts. He looked at the old man's map, the glowing white guideposts of lime powder stretching across the dark, ruined turf. The old man hadn't built a trap to destroy the opponent. He had built a sanctuary to protect his children. He knew every ridge, every loose root, and every hidden stream, because he had spent 30 years listening to the earth when everyone else was looking at the scoreboard. Ethan turned his eyes back to the field. Leo was standing near the center line, his breath coming in short, exhausted gasps, his patched canvas shoe caked in thick gray mud. The boy looked at Ethan, no longer waiting for a complex tactical matrix from a computer screen. He was waiting for a leader. Ethan stepped right to the edge of the field, his boots sinking into the wet clay. He tore off his high-visibility city jacket, throwing it onto the bench, exposing his simple, soaked training shirt to the freezing wind. Leo, Ethan roared, his voice cutting through the roar of the crowd, with absolute clarity. Forget the triangles. Forget the European positions. Look at the white marks. Trust the ground beneath your feet. We drive them to the ridge. The echoing roars from the foggy stands gradually condensed into a thick, rhythmic vibration pulsing through the damp soil. Ethan ran backward toward his technical area, his open palms cutting through the icy downpour as he gestured wildly to his defensive line. His breath tore from his throat in jagged, steaming bursts. Squeeze the center. Drop 2 meters below the wide line. Leo, hold the corridor, he bellowed, his voice losing every trace of its former academic detached coolness. Across the muddy divide, the City Academy coach slammed both fists against the plastic dugout canopy, the impact splashing sheets of trapped rainwater down onto his own leather coat. Don't let that limping brat turn, he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Leo. He's playing on a broken shoe. Tackle him hard. Break his momentum before he crosses the line. The match clock on the manual board didn't move. It simply stood there at 89 minutes, a rusted iron frame, holding 2 painted plates that read tustus. The referee checked his metallic stopwatch, his arm raised high as he blew a long, sweeping whistle to signal 4 minutes of added injury time. The city team restarted the play with brutal, immediate agresión. Their central playmaker didn't look for a passing triangle. He drove his long cleats straight into the mud, launching a heavy, diagonal aerial ball aimed directly at Leo's defensive zone. The ball sliced through the low inversion cloud, heavy with water, dropping like a stone. Leo didn't track the flight of the ball with his eyes. He kept his gaze fixed 3 inches below, watching the thick, wide veil of white lime powder beneath his feet. He remembered the hand-carved notches on the old man's yellow wooden ruler. The ground here has a spine. Boy, the water hides in the left pocket. As the massive city winger surged forward to claim the drop, Leo intentionally stepped 2 passes backward, leaving the open space completely clear.